Oops. Roll call. Councilmember Harris.
Here.
Councilmember Jeruso. Councilmember King. Councilmember Green is present. Councilmember Thomas. We have 2 members. We do not have a quorum.
That's fine. We don't have any voting
Roll
items.
call.
So, good afternoon, everyone. I know we have
Councilmember
folks here from
Harris.
Baton Rouge and people who need to
Councilmember
get back
Jeruso.
to
Councilmember
their
King.
jobs.
Councilmember
Administering
Green is
justice.
present.
Today is
Councilmember
Tuesday, April
Thomas.
8th, and this is
We
the
have
3rd Quality of
2
Life
members.
Committee
We do
meeting
not
for
have a quorum.
2025.
That's fine. We don't have any
Today's meeting,
voting
we will
items.
receive
So,
updates
good
from our
afternoon,
criminal
everyone. I
justice
know we have
partners
folks
on
here from
reducing
Baton
the
Rouge,
DNA
people who
backlog,
need to get back
and
to
hear a presentation
their
from the Health
jobs,
Department on
administering
Sexual Assault
justice.
Awareness
Today
Month.
is Tuesday, April
Reducing
8th,
the
and this
DNA
is the 3rd
backlog
Quality
at
of
the
Life
Louisiana
Committee
State
meeting for
Police Crime Lab has
2025.
been one of my
Today's meeting, we will
earliest
receive
and one of my
updates
top
from our criminal
priorities.
justice
I'm proud to
partners
share
on
that we've made
reducing the
significant
DNA
progress.
backlog and
With
hear a
this
presentation
council
from the Health
support, I was able
Department
to
on
secure
Sexual
$3
Assault
million
Awareness
in
Month.
funding to
Reducing
kickstart
the
this
DNA
initiative.
backlog at
And
the
thanks to
Louisiana
strong
State Police
collaboration
Crime
with
Lab has
NOPD,
been one of my
LSP
earliest
Crime Lab,
and one of my
and
top
city
priorities,
leadership, we are
and I'm
seeing
proud to
real
share that we've
results.
made significant
We've
progress.
successfully cleared
With
a
this
vast
council
majority of
support,
the
I was able
backlog
to
of sexual
secure
assault
$3
kits
million
that
in
the NOPD has
funding to
submitted
kickstart
to
this
Louisiana State
initiative,
Police for
and thanks to a
processing,
strong collaboration with
leaving only
NOPD,
187
the
kits
LSP
remaining,
Crime Lab,
many
and
of
city
which are
leadership,
newly
we are seeing
reported
real
cases.
results. We've
This marks a
successfully
significant
cleared
step
a
forward
vast
in
majority of
resolving
the
the
backlog of
long-standing
sexual
backlog.
assault kits that
Of
the
the
NOPD has
187
submitted
cases still in
to the
LSP
Louisiana State
custody,
Police for
77 are
processing,
homicides, and
leaving
49
only
are sexual assault
187
kits.
kits remaining,
5 additional
many of which are newly
analysts
reported
are nearly
cases.
finished with training and
This
will
marks a
soon be helping
significant
the
step
process,
forward in resolving the
to
long-standing
process even more
backlog.
cases.
Of the
Thus
187
increasing
cases still in
capacity for
LSP
speeding up
custody,
justice.
77 are homicides,
I
and
can tell you
49 are
that
sexual
when I
assault
first
kits.
visited the
5
state
additional
crime lab, I saw
analysts
sexual
are
assault
nearly
kits
finished with training
lined
and will
up on
soon be
shelves
helping the process
untested. And for me,
to process
every
even more
single kit,
cases, thus
untested
increasing
kit
capacity
represents a
for
delayed
speeding up
opportunity for
justice.
justice for survivors,
I can tell you
for
that
families,
when
and
I
for our
first
city.
visited the state
I would like
crime
to
lab,
thank all
I
of our
saw
criminal justice
sexual
partners
assault
from the
kits
city and state
lined
level who
up
worked
on
so
shelves
hard to make this a
untested.
reality.
And for
I
me,
wanna personally
every
thank
single
Captain
kit,
Tad Guidry,
untested kit,
Erica-
represents a delayed
I can't
opportunity for
pronounce Erica's
justice
last
for
name, and their
survivors,
team at
for
LSP,
families,
as
and
well
for our
as
city.
Superintendent
I would like to thank all of our criminal
Kelly
justice
from
partners from the
NOPD's
city
crime
and
lab
state level who
for their
worked so
dedication
hard
and
to make
hard
this a
work.
reality.
I also want to thank
I want
our
to personally
DA,
thank
Jason
Captain
Williams, who's
Tad
been
Guidry,
especially,
Erica,
interested in
I
this
can't
work and making
pronounce
sure
Erica's
that
last
those
name, and their
kits
team at
are
LSP, as
tested
well
and,
Superintendent Kirkpatrick and
as
Dr. Shamika Kelly
I
from
also want to
NOPD's
thank
Crime
Council
Lab
Vice President
for their
Paulina
dedication
Moreno
and hard
State
work.
Representative
I also want to
Mandy
thank our
Landry, who
DA,
helped
Jason
secure an
Williams, who's
additional
been
$1.3
especially
million in funding
interested in this
to keep
work
the
and making
momentum
sure
going.
that those
And I can
kids
tell you, I
that
will
are tested
advocate for
end up
additional money from
as
this council
evidence.
to make sure that we do
I
not
also want to
fall
thank
behind again.
Council Vice President
ensuring that
Paulina
our
Moreno
sexual
and
assault
State
kits are
Representative
tested.
Mandy Landry, who
We
helped
are
secure
delivering
an additional
justice through
$1.3 million in
technology,
funding
and
to keep the
collaboration,
momentum
making
going.
sure
And I can
perpetrators
tell
are
you, I will
identified and
advocate for additional money from this council to make sure that we do
With
not
that, I
fall
just
behind
want
again
to remind
on ensuring
everybody
that our
public
sexual
comment
assault
rules.
kits are tested.
Public comments can be submitted
We are
online,
delivering
beforehand,
justice
or
through
in
science,
person.
technology,
Public comments will
and
be limited to
collaboration,
one comment
making
per
sure
person per
perpetrators
item.
are identified
Comments
and the
should be limited
innocent,
to 2 minutes when read
are
aloud and be
exonerated.
germane to the agenda
With that,
item
I
at
just
hand.
want to
We
remind
don't have
everybody
any
of public
voting
comment
items,
rules.
so we can go
Public
ahead
comments can be
and
submitted
move forward
online
with
beforehand or
item
in person.
number
Public
3.
comments will be
I mean,
limited to
that's
one
nice.
comment per person per
This is
item.
the
Comments should be
DNA
limited to 2
outsourcing
minutes
project
when read aloud and be
presentations.
germane to
First
the
up,
agenda item
we
at
have,
hand.
the district
We
attorney's
don't have any
office
voting items, so
for
we can go ahead
funding purposes.
and
Is
move
that
forward
correct?
with item
we're
number
gonna go forward with
3,
the
Louisiana
Louisiana
State
State
Police
Police
District Attorney's Office and
This
the
is
New
the
Orleans Police
DNA
Department all at
outsourcing
once.
project presentations.
so that we can
First
get
up,
DA
we have,
Jason Williams out
The
here.
district attorney's office.
So the statements
For
come up as well
Funding
as,
purposes, is that correct?
we have,
New
we're
Orleans
going
Police
to go forward with
Department.
Louisiana
Please make
State
your way up to
Police
the front.
District Attorney's Office and the New Orleans Police Department all at once, so that we can get DA Jason
Madam
Williams out
Chair,
here.
as the
So
members who are
the
presenting
statements come up as well
may I
as
make a brief statement?
the New Orleans Police Department. Please make your way
I
up to
just
the
want to
front.
commend them as they come forward because it's an example of why we are able to. Madam Chair, as the members who are presenting our city of New Orleans, may I make a brief collaboration? So when I see representatives of NOPD, I just want to commend them as they come forward because it's an example of just always why we are able to reduce our crime rate in our city of New Orleans because of the collaboration. So when I see representatives of NOPD, in our city, DA's office, and the state police coming together, I'm just always inclined to present in advance or following my appreciation to you all for working together as you do. It makes a tremendous difference in our
Thank
city.
you, Councilmember.
Our
It
citizens
might
are
make
not only
sense for
feeling
Louisiana
safer, but
State
are
Police to present
safer
first,
because
and
of the
then DA Williams, if
collaborations
you have
that take
time.
place. I'll comment on it
let's go back
afterwards,
to
but as
order.
you sit down, I just wanted to say
And
thank you all in
introduce yourself to
advance
everyone
for
who's
working together.
Yes,
That's a
ma'am.
good look,
Lieutenant
sitting at
Scott
the table.
Davis from the
Appreciate it.
Louisiana State Police Crime
Thank you,
Lab.
Councilmember. It might make sense for Louisiana State Police to present first, and then DA Williams, please, so we could just pull them up to
Okay,
the
let's go back
mouse.
to order.
Sure.
Thank you. And introduce yourself to everyone who's here.
Yes, ma'am. So Lieutenant Scott Davis from the Louisiana State Police Crime Lab faced the backlog of approximately 4,600
And if y'all could just,
cases.
our microphones are spotty, so if you could just pull them up to your mouths.
Sexual assault
Thank you.
kits, 2 LSP, or more than any other police department. So in 2022, the Louisiana State Police Crime Lab faced a backlog of approximately 4,600 DNA cases. The New Orleans Police Department currently sends sexual assault kits, 2 LSP, many more than any other police department in the state. And there's a real need for efficient sexual assault victim case resolution, and that led to the initiative of a large-scale outsourcing project throughout this process. And we would like to thank you all for securing the $3 million for the city of New Orleans to support the outsourcing and logistics and sustaining the outsourcing initiative. Same as you've already said, but Representative Mandy Landry has been great throughout this process too as well for obtaining $1.3 million from the state of Louisiana for the same purpose. And it was essential in launching and sustaining the outsourcing initiative, which is going well from our perspective, and we continue to be partners with you all. For us, it's working quite well. We hope the same. So far, we've outsourced 1,014 cases. 914 have been returned to us. 927 of those cases have been reviewed, and we have cases with pending review status, 587, NOPD cases in LSU custody is 197, and that includes 77 homicide, 49 sexual assault kits, and we have CODIS hits from outsourced cases, that's 60. It makes it sustainable for so we've reduced this backlog to 2,098 since late 2023, and the outsourcing provides faster turnaround times and eases the workload on the in-house handlers. It makes it sustainable for our crime lab to continue its normal operations as well. Forward-facing dashboard, ongoing analyst training, they're also internal capacity moving forward. And then we also have a link to this on the next slide, but Chad Guidry wanted us to present it, and it's just a forward-facing dashboard that shows, the various metrics for sexual assault kits in their track.
Thank you. DA Williams?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon. To you and to Councilman Green, I want to thank you for the opportunity to present on this issue today. This happening is, I want to thank you, Councilman Green, vital for all the work that we do in court. Every single day, I want to offer my sincere gratitude to you for your leadership on this issue. This city's put up this happening to this entire body. And I want to thank you, Councilman Green, for always making sure that the collaboration between the agencies is amplified. It truly makes a difference when you look at the public safety numbers that this city's put up compared to any other city in this country. Our numbers are better than any other city, in spite of the size of the force, in spite of the allocation, and to the state police, because they have been the collaboration that you're seeing municipally and statewide. To help us deliver. Also want to thank Sarah Montano for moving quickly after the council made the allocation, and to the state police, because they have been the sixth man on this basketball team to help us deliver at a better rate, at a faster rate, and a more accurate rate, especially when it comes to DNA. That backlog was long-standing before you all. The decision point that you all made when you saw the problem that we were dealing with just because has allowed us to confront a massive and unprecedented backlog. Addressed it, and you addressed that backlog was long-standing before you all were in your post and before I was in my post. In the national context, it was there and you found it there. You didn't just as it relates to kick it down the road. And before you all addressed it, you addressed it with real investments and a commitment to see how that investment was playing out. In the national context, is going to discuss the power of DNA as it relates to justice. And before I get to local outcomes, I want to sort of talk about the macro and the broader context. DNA is in fact one of the most powerful tools in criminal prosecution. Its accuracy level is higher than witness identification. It also clears innocent. According to the National Institute of Justice, DNA has helped identify the guilty in over 500,000 criminal investigations nationwide. But it doesn't just convict, as you alluded to in your opening remarks, it also clears innocent. Untested DNA Project reports that over 275 people have been exonerated through DNA since 1989, with a 99% involving violent crimes for murder and rape. With simple testing. Untested DNA represents a serious missed opportunity. The FBI estimates that there are over 250,000 unsolved rape cases across the country. In recent cases, potentially be solved only possible with simple testing, simple DNA testing. The work of our sexual assault kit initiative, otherwise known as cases that aren't solved, has achieved remarkable results for survivors in recent cases and cold cases, and this is only possible through the resources that you all devoted to testing. And survivors. These are not numbers. I want to thank you in advance. Look at the numbers of cases that aren't solved because DNA isn't tested. Those are lost chances to hold dangerous offenders accountable and bring healing to victims and survivors. I want to thank you in advance for providing a space for our partners like the Health Department and the Family Justice Centers and others to represent on ongoing collaborative efforts to combat and respond to sexual assault, sexual violence against women and children are greatly unreported, and they're greatly unreported because they typically are not solved. To go through all of that, it's a hard ask to ask someone to go through the extended trauma of fluorescent lights and having your body examined, standing on a piece of paper to treat your body like a crime scene. To go through all of that so that evidence can be collected. This body's investment, and then to have that evidence contract with DNA Labs International. It is insult to injury. A triage, specifically with regards to the local impact of a situation what the outsourcing project has achieved, growing to a point that it would have been thanks to this body's investment, the contract with DNA Labs International created a triage, and there's simply not a way to of a situation that was at what growing to a point that it would have been insurmountable had you all not addressed it when you had. Hundreds of previously untested forensic samples were processed, and there's simply not a way to look aspirationally at what we can achieve when we've got that backlog finally in front of us. Brought to trial, and the emergency situation evidence had been sitting on the shelf for quite some time. Triage with the help of our partners at the LSP. They jumped right in, and they found solutions. Many of these cases court setback. We're finally able to be brought to trial because that DNA evidence had been sitting on the shelf for quite some time. And I can't tell you what that means to survivors. Survivor frustration continues. Every court setback and waiting on DNA is just another traumatic experience. No defense attorney is going to go to trial. Madam Chair, this committee, because of you all's efforts, helped turn survivor frustration into progress. To telling 12 people and served justice. They went through. Cases just could not go forward. No defense attorney is going to go to trial without the DNA being tested. And we certainly didn't want to subject a survivor. I want to elaborate on telling 12 people some challenges that what they went through part of this process so that we can make sure having that testimony be backed up with the DNA evidence. There are certain hidden costs testimony that crop up. I want to elaborate on. I'm going to get into a little bit of the nuances of that. Some challenges that are still a part of this process so that we can make sure that we're fine-tuning as we go along. There are certain hidden costs in an emergency situation that crop up. And I'm going to get into a little bit of the nuances. In the medical world, this was a triage situation. Patients who are beyond help. And triage, as we all know, is a rapid assessment in an emergency situation. In an emergency situation, to figure out how to categorize and those with minor injuries delivered. In the medical world, these categories would be patients who are beyond help, injured who can be helped immediately with immediate transport, and injured persons whose transport can be delayed, and those with minor injuries who can wait to be transported. Thanks to the state police. In a triage situation, thanks to this investment, if it's a battle, we're in a position a limb might be cut off from, or that limb might be able to be saved when there's not as many other emergencies. So let me just sort of lay out. Thanks to the state, what we're faced with. Thanks to this body, thanks to this investment, I believe we're in a position where we can move away from through the triage stream into national best practices. The DA's office still, when a case went to so let me just sort of lay out was required to what we're faced with. To cover, so while the testing was paid for through the LSP, collecting evidence through the funding stream that this council created. The DA's office still, when a case went to trial, was required to sourcing the right ingredients and chopping the next steps those vegetables and seasonings. Collecting evidence is a first step. And do what he does with the right amount of testing evidence is another step. Not dissimilar from a sous chef in court, sourcing the right ingredients and chopping up those vegetables and seasonings for the chef to come in and do what he does with the right amount of heat. And using the right amount of ingredients. In some cases, we still need live testimony in court, created an invoice and trial prep. That total so the hourly fees for expert DNA analysts to come to the city of New Orleans, travel, lodging for out-of-state witnesses. In some cases, and I brought the invoices, create a cost burden and created an invoice that totaled more than $10,000 per case as these cases increase. So. In criminal trials, time if we continue to operate that way, I think it would, as we can, create a cost burden and make every delay forward on these cases in trials cost prohibitive integrity as these cases increase and our ability to secure justice. So in criminal trials, time is ultimate currency. We want to move swiftly, smarter as we can after harm has been caused. Every delay adds more trauma to survivors and risks integrity of the case and our ability to secure justice. So I believe national best practices would dictate as well a smarter public safety numbers way forward. But as we celebrate, and I think it's important that we all today celebrate I think we can build the success that this achievement that we made with the council has secured for survivors and victims, actually take us as well as for the public safety numbers broadly. But as we celebrate, if cutting through the unprecedented categories of cases, I think we can build on the momentum that beyond made with the state police, that we made with the council. For example, to actually take us to the next level. Dutifully, and two things will do this. I think if we can expand on the categories of cases that are allowed to be tested beyond murder and sexual assault. But the police can come out, for example, testing the NOPD dutifully looks for evidence that they can collect at every crime scene, whether that's a car break-in, and I think we've all been through that when we sit on the glass on the way to work, but the police can come out and they're testing for evidence at those car break-ins. They're testing, or they're collecting, rather, evidence to be tested at home break-ins, car break-ins, and other sorts of crimes that aren't just murder and sexual assault. Police department now, because of the backlog, because of the triage situation, and so Paris, as well as other parishes across the state, are forced to choose the most serious. And we also hope that this committee could work with us. Best practices would have us test our own local all of the evidence that our police department is collecting to take these individuals off the street, either in Atlanta or Houston. We would hope that we could expand those categories as we move forward, and we would also hope that this committee could work with us and our own local expert, Dr. Kelly, to contract directly with vendors, either in Atlanta or Houston, a short flight, allocating the same amount of Spirit flight for usually about $100 and some odd from either one of those jurisdictions, which would cut down on the cost of travel for experts who have to come in to testify. Allocating the same amount of funds that we did to the backlog to clear that, to pursue volume-based contracts with an outside party that can be more responsive to all of those cases, saving money on expert travel, home burglaries, robberies, sexual assaults, and of course homicide. And I believe that we can create economies of scale for the overall cost of that local testing, saving money on expert travel and testimony. Close to that 85%. We achieved an 85% success rate in homicide prosecution. I think if we can add DNA testing to other cases in other areas, we can move that success rate up close to that 85% success rate that we found in homicide. 85%, that's close to 25% than the national average and the state average in terms of prosecutions. According to the Urban Institute, jurisdictions that proactively test DNA in sexual assault cases and non-sexual assault cases see double suspect identification, wrongful convictions. And just looking ahead, this 2023 RAND Corporation report found that every dollar invested in DNA analysis yields $3 to $5 in societal savings due to reduced crime and wrongful convictions. And just looking ahead, this sustained momentum is necessary until we can have our own crime lab up for parishes across the state. And look, I thank the state police for not saying what a burden New Orleans Parish is, but we send a lot of work there with a good partner, and they're not just responsible for Orleans Parish test kits. They're trying to do this work for parishes across the state, and these other parishes have a backlog as well. To find any reduced burden we can provide to an agency that's been such a good partner to us, I think, is a smart move. And all sorts. And I think in the interim, if we can work collaboratively with discounts with Dr. Kelly to find an interim solution for our local problem, because we can be nimble, we can be responsible to violent crime and all sorts of crimes. Car break-ins in Lakeview are connected to car break-ins in the Lower Ninth here. And the only thing that's going to connect that for us, because we don't have eyewitnesses in those cases, would be DNA found on the glove box for people looking for guns and money. In closing, I would just say to you, thank you for helping us clear this unprecedented DNA backlog. I think that we was not convinced it was possible. Thank to the state police for accepting that challenge and figuring out a way to help us when they help other parishes across the state. I think we can continue support. I think we can build a modern, I think that we can stay ahead of DNA strategy violent crime. We've reduced it nationally. I think we can reduce it even more. It's not good enough to sit on the laurels of our success. I think we can all do better. I think we can build a modern, proactive, survivor-focused DNA strategy that puts New Orleans on the map nationally. As a model for forensic justice, with autonomy, flexible resources, and continued partnerships and collaboration, we can, and we will keep pushing justice forward faster and fairer. So thank you for your support. Thank you for leaning in on the toughest issues, and thank you to my partners at the table.
Thank you. Thank you, Terry Williams. Is the NRPD here? Are you ready to go?
I just need my presentation.
Okay. Can we get this pulled up? You might have to play musical chairs.
So good afternoon. My name is Erin Levy. I'm a DNA supervisor at the NOPD Crime Lab Forensic Biology Unit, and I'm here to present our roadmap to bringing DNA testing back to New Orleans. Good afternoon. My name is Erin Levy. I'm a DNA supervisor at the NOPD Crime Lab Forensic Biology Unit, and I'm here to present our roadmap to bring DNA testing back to New Orleans. We are actually a decent way through this roadmap. We started off by hiring a highly qualified and experienced staff. We have gotten through a good bit of our procurement process. This is ordering our equipment, reagents, and supplies needed for testing. Although procurement will be ongoing throughout the life of the crime lab. So now that we have been writing policies, which is our procedures for using these reagents and equipment. We are creating our training program in-house and determining what our casework flow is going to look like. So now that we have reagents and equipment in, and we have policies that are being written, after all this, we have to validate all of these. So this involves research studies to determine accuracy and quality of the equipment and methods that we have used in-house before we use them on actual casework. After all this has been done, we're actively working on training all of our staff how to use all the equipment and reagents we have and what the policies mean and reagents and everything involved with the process. Our analysts are currently in the lab right now training work into accreditation. So this is basically ensuring that we provide the highest quality work and product on an evidence item. And giving us a guide. Our current goals, our analysts are currently in the lab right now training in serology. So serology is basically the precursor to DNA. It's determining if there are any body fluids present on an evidence item and giving us a guide on which samples to send forward to DNA. At the same time, we're applying for accreditation in serology. Our management and our analysts and then applying with the different goals is everything to do with the DNA process itself. So policy development or procurement, performing validations on the DNA instruments of this process. Training our management and our analysts and then applying with the different entities for accreditation. Experienced analysts working mock cases. So I've talked a lot about training. Training is probably one of the biggest time-consuming parts of this process. It's a multi-step process involving our trainees observing experienced analysts working mock cases. And I say mock cases since we're not actually taking real-life cases right now. We have to create these cases in-house that mimic what a real case would look like. This is where after our trainees observe experienced analysts, our experienced analysts then observe our trainees performing mock cases themselves. They also go through a competency testing period and a case mentorship process. This is where they'll be paired with an experienced analyst, work alongside them, and develop more experience. After this, they will go through proficiency testing, which is basically a test from an outside agency that no one in-house knows the answer to this test, and they get submitted outside of our agency and to determine if the analyst will pass. This is a brief because we are able to testify in court, they will also go through mock trials. Things are happening at the same time. So this can take anywhere from a year and a half to 2 years to fully train an analyst. Another thing that we want to point out is a brief view of our timeline. Our main goal of this timeline is to show you that multiple things are happening at the same time. We're not working on one thing at a time. Everything's happening concurrently. Another thing that we want to point out is in the second one, there's a section for design and renovation. Yes, the crime lab is relatively new. However, the design is not efficient and it has detrimental issues that could happen in real-life casework where there is serious concerns for contamination issue of evidence and also the security of evidence. So we are working with the design team to make sure evidence is safe and secure and will not get contaminated. As well as our timeline. But with that being said, we are currently on track to be fully operational in 2027.
Thank you. Let me start with
So
you.
just a brief summary of what I went over. I talked about our roadmap to DNA, our current and future goals, as well as our timeline.
Are we going to have to change that timeline? It sounds like from your testimony today that we need to move into 2027.
Thank you. Let me start with you,
I
Karen.
was not aware of
We
that.
had an ordinance that required the
from
DNA
Dr.
lab to
Kelly,
be accredited
has
by
always been
2026. Are we going to have to
So,
change that timeline?
would
It sounds like from your
2027.
testimony today
Okay, and
that
then
we
you
need to
have
move into
here
2027 and
throughout,
change the
timeline
ordinance.
procurement,
I was
And we know that
not
there have
aware
been
of that. My
issues in other areas with
directive from
procurement.
Dr.
Are you
Kelly
facing those same
has
issues?
always been
Or is
2027.
Or is
So,
procurement pretty
I would assume
easy,
2027
given
is
the Okay, and then you have here throughout the
has gotten
timeline
better.
procurement, and we know that there have been
definitely was
issues
major
in other
delays in the
areas with
beginning, and it's
procurement. Are
gotten
you
better,
facing
and
those
we're
same
working on that
issues?
partnership.
Or is okay, if you need additional help with pretty easy, given the importance of the crime lab PD,
It
but
has
for
gotten
other areas
better.
within the city?
There definitely was
When
major
we talk
delays
about
in the beginning.
design,
It has gotten better,
redesign
and
of the
we're working
lab,
on that
do you know how
partnership.
long that will take? Okay, if you
I
need
currently
additional
do
help
not
with
have a
procurement
timeframe
issues,
for
please
that.
let
That
us
is
know,
very
because
much
that
an
has been a sticking
estimate.
point, not
There's
only
a lot
for
of factors
NFPD,
that
but
go
for other
into that.
areas
Okay,
within
and
the
then
city.
once you're up and running,
When you talk about the design, redesign of the lab, do you know how long that will take? From the crime lab
We
over to
currently
the
do
DA,
not have a time frame for
to
that.
the
That is
interview,
very
and then
much an
ultimately to
estimate.
come to court to
There's
testify at
a
trial.
lot of
Is that
factors
correct?
that are going into
Which will
that.
ultimately okay, and then once you're up and running in 2027, then that means that we will have local experts who can go directly from the crime lab over to the DA to be interviewed and then ultimately to come to court to testify at trial. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Which will ultimately cut the cost of DNA analysis if we are doing this in-house. Okay. Do you know how much that would cut the cost? Walk us through the
Based
process
off
of how
of
DNA
his numbers, you wouldn't
samples
have
are
to fly
tested and
analysts
analyzed,
here and
specifically
that
the
kind
ones that are coming
of
from
thing,
Orleans
so I
Parish.
can't give you an exact number, but it would drastically reduce
Yes.
costs.
Okay, I'm going to turn to the Louisiana State Police. Can you walk us through the process of how DNA samples are tested and analyzed, specifically the ones that are coming from Orleans Parish?
Specifically for the ones that are
package up
outsourced?
the
Yes.
evidence.
Yeah, so the evidence is submitted to the lab. From there, we have to create what's called a manifest. And this is just to provide the outsourced agency the information, the case information, and then what type of evidence that we will ship to them. We then package up the evidence, we ship it out to the contracting laboratory, and also provide them with this manifest. Over time, as they complete the analysis, the DNA analysis process, they can issue reports to send us the reports and all the related case files for the case. And then we have to do an internal review. And that internal review is because we also have we have access to the CODIS database, which the outsourcing company does not have access to. And that's why we have to review their work. And also just to verify that the work is going smoothly. It's very dependent on the outsourcing company on any when they complete their analysis and put into the CODIS database. And then that's when we'll input it into the CODIS database and then issue a report from the Louisiana State Police Crime Lab. It's very dependent on the outsourcing company on when they complete their analysis, and it's essentially just like a rolling process. We ship out evidence. They every so often issue reports to us, and then we also the state is also.
And where are these outsourced labs located? I know DA Williams was talking about Atlanta would be quicker to look at Texas, the DNA once
The
it comes
current
back. Is that correct?
laboratory that we ship out to is in Florida, and then we also, the state is also in contract with a lab in Virginia.
Okay. And then I know that we are looking at 5 more analysts to look at the DNA once it comes back. Is that correct?
We are currently going to be assigning 5 analysts off next month to enter in the DNA analysis process. And we, at that time, we adjust to see if we need to pull more analysts out of the state, just the regular state process, and put them on the outsourcing project. When you have the analysis,
So it sounds like once our DNA lab is, our crime lab is up and running in 2027, that there will be a shortening of the time for analysis and then entering into the CODIS database. Is that correct?
Correct. When you have the analysis in-house, that will definitely shorten the time where you're essentially shipping off. Right now, we're currently shipping off the evidence to an outsourced company and then have to evaluate all the results once we receive that. So definitely will shorten that time for New Orleans.
D.A. Williams, can you talk about the other companies, and have you spoken to them or had any conversations with the companies in Atlanta and Texas?
We have not had contacts in terms of expertise, and of course, we would be working with our partners at LSP. I don't think we're in a position to negotiate a contract per se, which is why I suggested a possibility of partnering with this body and Dr. Kelly because of our expertise, and of course, we would be working with our partners at LSP as well, because any outside private companies, not being law enforcement in Atlanta, is not going to Houston cannot cause that critical piece of inputting this information to the CODIS system. And that's really just that but we have researched for testimony. There's nothing to do with the capabilities of companies in Atlanta and Houston only because of that short flight and inexpensive flight. And that's really just that back end for testimony. But at the end of the day, there's nothing to do with the capabilities of labs in Virginia or Florida. Anything we can do, they're all to reduce the cost burden. We want to make sure that they are all up to those companies' national best practices. But at the end of the day, with a $10,000 price tag for testimony, anything we can do to reduce the cost burden experts to help us of city dollars, so we can make sure we get the right one. And those companies that we have researched and found, we stand ready to present a list to you and your colleagues with local experts to help us vet, so we can make sure we get the right one. My hope is we can have a conversation about expanding that volume again, so it's not just sexual assault, more submissions, not just homicide cases, but and doing car break-in and a home break-in and other robbery cases, and enter into a contract that is saving the city of New Orleans money by taking more submissions on and doing them all at a more reduced rate.
To triage. Okay, thank you. And for our state crime lab partners, putting it aside for a second, to triage amount of money, sexual assault, about cases, $4.5 million that we dedicated between the allocation from city council and from the state. To continue to triage and taking the advice of the DA, but putting it aside for a second, to triage murder and sexual assault cases, how much more money would you need for 2025, 2026?
But that's,
until our own lab gets up and running.
I guess I feel like that would be difficult for us to
And I guess I'm asking without that expansion of more crimes.
we were looking
I
at
assume it's just crime
$1.3
dependent.
million,
It depends on how many
I
murders we
believe.
have, how many sexual assaults we have as well.
But that's, I don't know that we had factored in like the expansion on more crime, $1.5 million.
And I guess I'm asking without that expansion of more crimes, I assume it's just crime dependent. It depends on how many murders we have, how many sexual assaults we have as well. That could get you through a year and a half and get us into hopefully 2027
So
when our
approximately 4 to 5
crime lab is up and
million.
running. Okay, for 2020, Councilmember Green?
Per year.
Per year,
Chair, I'd
okay.
like to comment after the public
Per
comment.
year and a
Well,
half.
right now, we only have one that could get you through a year and a half and get us into hopefully 2027 when our crime lab is up and running.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, okay. Councilmember Green?
Madam Chair, I'd like to comment after the
I'm the Executive
public comment.
Director of
Well,
Shift
right now, we only
Change,
have one
a
public
nonprofit
comment,
that does sexual violence
and
prevention
that
work
is
for the
from
service
Mark
industry.
Shetler.
Just a little rah-rah here for y'all. I wanted to register my strong support and deep appreciation for all that this council and Mark Scheller, I'm the Executive Director of Shift Change. We're a nonprofit that does sexual violence prevention work for the service industry. Just a little rah-rah here for y'all. I wanted to register my strong support and deep appreciation for all that this council and various speakers here today have done and continue to do on this issue. Especially appreciate the work of DA Williams' office. I'm actually served on his transition team in a capacity focused on reforms to the DA's office, to their approach to sexual violence and intimate partner violence. Community problem demands dedicated. You never know if elected officials are actually going to follow through on their promises, but his office absolutely has. They picked up all the reforms that came out of our work on the team. This community problem demands a dedicated community response, and I just want to very much commend all who have joined us in this work. especially our law enforcement partners and the passionate elected officials up there. Thank you.
This week was supposed to
Thank
be
you.
my trial
I'm Catherine Dickey.
for my sexual assault. I've waited 3.5 years, and I would like to know if the DA has a plan to... Good afternoon, my name is Catherine Dickey. Expedite, not just the DNA. The DNA was supposed to be my trial. When I was at the hospital, I got there about 9:30. I waited 3.5 years, closer to 10. And I would like to know if the DA has a plan to the VA hospital to expedite, not just the DNA. The DNA is very, very important. When I was at the hospital, I got there about 9:30 in the morning. Maybe it's closer to 10:30. They arrested. I drove myself from my home to the VA hospital because I'm that was November of 20. Better uniform nurse because they knew by December of 21 they had him arrested. I drove myself given to the ER. There's been a myriad. They arrested false steps and broken promises. That was November of 21, elongated torture. And by December of 21, they had him arrested. He was immediately what is the average rate of sexual assaults that are actually reported of false steps and broken promises? When I got there, I was in elongated torture. I was a sixth for myself. When I left, I want to know what is the average rate of sexual assaults that are actually reported in Orleans Parish. At UMC. I can tell you that when I got there, I was at 10 o'clock in the morning. I was the sixth person to be tested. When I left, 8 hours later, there were 3 people waiting for rooms. There are only 2, I would like to know, 2 nurses when we are going to have better at UMC. Accountability. UMC, University Medical Center, is the only place in Orleans Parish to be tested stall for any of this. And the continuances that happened. I would like to know years when we are going to have better accountability. Have a rescheduling. And it's not just in the DNA. The DNA is a huge piece.
Thank you, Catherine.
But the stall and the continuances
Williams, you have
that happened
She's
for now
absolutely
years.
right.
And
Sexual
I still
assaults
don't
in
have
this
a
country and in this city
rescheduled court date.
are they're poorly investigated and they're poorly
Thank you,
prosecuted.
Catherine.
They have never sexual assault against women and children
Williams, you have any
has never
comment?
been a priority. She's absolutely right. Sexual assaults in this country and in this city are from top to bottom investigated and poorly prosecuted. They have never hospital. Sexual assault against women and children responds has never been a priority. What happens in my office? It is violent crime. In the hospital, it needs to be DNA talked about broadly from top to bottom, every part of the system, from entry into the hospital to how the first responder responds timely to what happens in my office, what happens in the hospital, what happens with the DNA. She is 100% correct, and it is going to be a group lift, and it's going to take us so that we can move swiftly. It is necessary, it is timely, and I commit to her and every other survivor in this community. One of the most violent things that can happen to do my part, human being, to amplify the need of our own local labs so that we can move swiftly. Is another trauma. While a nurse and doctor, sexual assault is over every inch of your body. One of the most violent things that can happen to any human being. That's just another trauma. And every court date, examination, every person you have to talk to tell the story to. While a nurse and doctor comb over every inch of your body as a crime scene and collect everything they can, that's just another trauma. And every court date, whether it's arraignment, every person you have to talk to tell the story to is another trauma. So the use of social media. I completely agree with everything that she said. I was meeting with Mario Bravo and members of the NOPD and my chief of SVU with our OSIT team to try to bring the use of social media and some other technologies to bear to help prove cases different ways.
The solve rate is still
She's absolutely right.
Yeah, thank you, Dave Williams, and I will say that from our, we need to do better, and our next committee, criminal justice committee, I know that reported the DNA is a step in the right direction because but the solve rate is still our victims, our survivors.
And that does not even include college campus.
Right. So we are committed to. So we need to do better, and I know our next presenters will talk more about how we can do better. But I think that the DNA is a step in the right direction because it shows our victims, our survivors, that
And
we
the one thing
care
about
for them,
about DNA and
that
getting
we are
it quickly,
committed to solving their
oftentimes
cases and
perpetrators
committing
will plead
to
guilty
prosecuting those
when they
who
know
are
that their
victimizing
DNA
people.
has been
So that hopefully will
found
cause a
after the
ripple effect
test,
so people
which
actually come
can,
forward when they are victims of sexual assault.
And the one thing about DNA and traumatized by coming back to court, oftentimes perpetrators will plead guilty when they know that their DNA has been found after the test, which can and solve other cases prevent survivors from having to be traumatized by coming back to court to testify. And that singular conviction on one case
We have two more
could
cards.
be dealing
Skip
with
Gallagher,
a repeat
followed by
offender,
Louis Ambo.
and solve other cases with that one singular conviction, because it is the type of crime that is predatory, that offenders tend to reoffend.
Thank
Hello,
you.
my name is Skip Gallagher.
We have two more
Give me my
cards.
address
Skip
and-
Gallagher, followed by
You need to
Louis
say your
Ambo.
address
And whether or not you're a paid actor.
Very good. 516 Belleville Street, New Orleans, Louisiana. And no, I'm not paid for this. So, hello, my name is Skip Gallagher. I wanted to address. Give me my address or anything. Thank you up
You
front,
need
by the
to
way.
say your
You were
address and
very
whether or not
important
you're a
to
paid
forward that money
actor.
to make something 516 Belleville Street, New Orleans, Louisiana. I am concerned. And no, I'm not paid for this until 2027. One of my concerns that I wanted to address, and thank you up front, by the way. You were very important in forward that money to make something happen. And that was more than a year ago. Now, I am concerned that the lab was going to be delayed until 2027. Parked into infinity. As you may know, I've done multiple public records requests, and I found more than 100,000 DNA samples that are parked in central private labs. And that was more than a year ago. What are we going to do about those samples? Are they simply parked into infinity? Will we actually make some effort to address them? And I do understand it's incredibly expensive to send these to private labs. I think we're paying about $3,500 to $3,600 per sample, and this has gone on for testing, as you know, on a positive sample. Is there any thought? It worries me that we are missing criminals who are repeat offenders, and we have the evidence. Have you thought of hiring qualified DNA experts from other, and this has gone on for, as you know, years. Currently, I teach forensic science at the University of New Orleans. Right now, on this, I haven't heard of the addressed at this point. So what's going on is sort of one other point. Have you thought of hiring qualified DNA experts from other hired away jurisdictions? Very quickly for currently, I teach forensic science at the University of New Orleans, and right now there is not enough DNA experts. What's going on is this sort of hiring frenzy where somebody trains someone, they stay there for 6 months, and they're hired away very, very quickly for $10,000 to $20,000 more, because they're already a qualified DNA expert. I am concerned that we may be training people and see this happen again. We've seen it happen in the past. We lost our DNA experts to other jurisdictions due to higher pay.
By outsourcing to labs that are closer and cheaper. Thank you, Mr. Gallagher. And doing on the issue of the additional samples, that's what Dave Williams was talking about, is whether or not we can expand the amount of samples that we test. We are hiring by outsourcing to labs that are closer and cheaper, and doing a volume outsourcing. So that's one issue. On the hiring of experts, we have our DNA lab here. I know that we are hiring people. I don't think that we can do any sort of non-compete. Louis Ambo, followed by Jamie Johnson.
I will say, as someone who was recently hired, NOPD's pay and benefits is extremely competitive, and it's what drew me here.
Good afternoon, Louis
Thank you, Mr. Gallagher. Louis Ambo, followed by Jamie Johnson.
I'm actually a violent offender. I came here today really to just sit in on this topic. Good afternoon, Louis Ambo, 2927 No, I'm not a paid actor. I've been free since 2010. I'm actually a violent offender. I'm a veteran. So hearing that lady speak about, came here today really to just something that affects a veteran, sit in on this topic. After hearing the numbers, I felt I needed to say something. Keeps me free. I've been free since 2010. Times I'm trying to stay free. I'm a veteran. So hearing that lady speak about, something that affects a veteran, it moves me. I believe that this work keeps me free. No, I'm not committing any more crimes. I'm trying to stay free.
Good afternoon. Sorry.
Thank you.
Okay, my name is Jamie Johnston, and I come before you all today as a protective mother during Sexual Assault Awareness Month to speak truth to power and to demand justice for my 5-year-old son, Drew. In October of 2023, my name is Jamie Johnston, and I come before you all today as a protective mother during Sexual Assault Awareness Month to speak truth to power and to demand justice for my 5-year-old son, Drew. In October of 2023, my son bravely disclosed sexual abuse during a forensic interview at the Children's Hospital Child Advocacy Center. Right here in New Orleans, the name he gave us was Jamon Kenner. Instead of protecting Drew, the system protected his abuser. Jamon Kenner filed a forged affidavit of paternity at Touro Hospital without my knowledge or consent, and used it to gain fraudulent custody through the Texas courts. Despite Drew being born and living in New Orleans, I was never served, never heard, and never given a chance to protect him. And it gets worse. The New Orleans Police Department enforced Texas orders based on those fraudulent documents, and I, along with my family, was jailed right here in New Orleans. No investigation, no due diligence, no due process. Just blind belief and paperwork rooted in lies. But the truth came out. On April 4th, 2025, my family and I were acquitted of all charges of kidnapping my baby. We were innocent, but my son is still out there, unprotected, in the hands of someone who said hurt him. Because of fraud and connections, we're allowed to silence the truth. Council members, I'm asking you today, during this month when we say believe survivors, to believe my son, to expose the public fraud that enabled this miscarriage of justice, and to ensure that no other child's voice is ignored because someone powerful knew how to exploit the system. Drew deserves safety, he deserves to be heard, and I will not stop fighting until he is free from harm. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnston.
Yes, I just wanted to thank
And we'll
everyone
have
again for your
someone from my
presentation
office
and
come down
everyone
and
for
talk
being
to you
here.
in a second. Thank you.
Mr. DA, I do want to point out and tell
Councilmember,
you that I appreciate your analysis.
Would you like to say anything?
of the
That was
issue,
the last
and
comment.
I
Yep.
appreciate your strong trust in and support. Thank everyone again for your presentation. Members of our law enforcement community who have to sometimes gather that information, point out and tell you that your willingness to have them to be able to potentially gather additional information at the scene of trust that in and support that we're analyzing today. The members of our law enforcement community who have to sometimes gather that information. So I just for your willingness to have them to be able to potentially gather additional information at the scenes of crimes that are beyond the crimes that we're analyzing today is a step that says that you certainly trust the work that they're doing. Someone breaks a window and they're taking a gun. I just ask you to, and there's DNA let me know whatever I can do. It's worthy because I also have that strong that person belief in our law enforcement community that they are focused on doing the right thing. And you're right. Also, when someone breaks a window and they're taking a gun, and there's DNA left behind, it's worthy of us to be able to analyze maybe that person who did that took that gun and is involved with other crimes. That's one thing that it could expose. But also, obviously, in other instances of crime, breaking into homes, for example, people at risk. Sometimes those homes are occupied. Thank you for that, and sometimes they're not. And the person who did the crime doesn't care about getting and using that DNA evidence could help try to stop some of the in-home burglaries that we have, based on what you suggest. Some of which put people at risk. But I just want to thank you for that, and
gathering of evidence and science
to be deliberate about asking me to work in whatever way I can to help try to make us able to do more based on what you're suggesting.
Yes, sir.
And smarter,
Councilmember Thomas.
and how to be evasive. The gathering of evidence and science on us, no one's extremely important. Me, and as those who want to hurt us and break the law become, and no one more strategic has ever been charged. And smarter, and how to be evasive in one car and commit their crimes on us. No one knows better than me the other passengers deceased. My family's cases were public. Nicholas Harris, and no one's life to us has ever been charged. 57 bullets, biological, one car, nephew. My niece survived, and my family will never be the same than many other passengers who share the same DNA. Nicholas Harris killed. His life to us will never be in vain. And though he wasn't my biological nephew, he was raised within my family, was closer, cleaned up than many I understand who share the same DNA. And our family still mourns his loss because there's no closure. Hours passed, a life gone, one person maimed, the scene was cleaned up, I understand, allegedly lost. So our family still mourns. I'm supposed to be someone who's lost because there's no closure. Help. A life gone, one person maimed and debilitated, another person lost. So family gatherings, in the end, I'm supposed to be someone, so hopefully in charge, who can help. So I may not be able to help and answer my family, but how do you tell a loved one that perpetrated these crimes? There are no answers. No one will ever be justice. And hopefully those lives, so hopefully, and that other lives, I may not be able to help my family.
Thank you, Councilmember Thomas. Any closing remarks from
Perpetrated
our
these
panel?
crimes, no one will ever be to justice.
I would just
Hopefully
say that,
those lives, that
this is
disability,
one of the
and that other life
few
will not be in
times
vain.
that City Hall
Thank you, Councilmember
has turned
Thomas.
its attention
Any
to,
closing remarks from our
this
panel?
topic. And I really think this. I would just say that, and you know, this is one of the talk about it. Few times that City Hall has turned its attention to. If we get this this topic. A lot of people around the country, and I really think this count. It's uncomfortable. Asking how, and a lot of people don't like to talk about it. Violent crime from the pandemic that every city saw. And we've done it in every major. This will be a sea change if we get this right. It was a group lift. It was a lot of people around the country are looking at the city of New Orleans, and they're calling, they're asking, how we turn the tide on violent crime, all sorts of other issues every city saw. The detritus, and we've done it in every major society that find their way. But it was a group lift. It was not just law enforcement. It was also investing in young people, investing in the community, more light. They don't get intimidated with all sorts of other issues by someone who the detritus or the failures of society that find their way to a criminal court. So they provide solid evidence. DNA, whether it is test results, is DNA found. They don't get intimidated a piece of broken glass by someone who bonded out and is driving by a house. Right, so they provide solid evidence. Orleans Parish, whether it is will believe in. DNA found on a casing, a piece of broken glass, a window seal for a wrongdoer, and a glass of wine, whatever. It is solid evidence that Orleans Parish juries will believe in and will feel confident in to come back with unanimous verdict using national best practices to shift from triage. And I think this investment will help us increase our public safety numbers and improve public safety numbers off the street and connect more dots between crimes. Building on that momentum, and being and using national best practices to shift from triage to national best practices will help us increase our public safety numbers and take more violent offenders off the street and connect more dots between crimes that are occurring in one councilman district compared to another.
Thank you. And I want to thank you all for being here today, especially the Louisiana State Police. When we toured that facility with Captain Chad Guidry, survivors, again, just saw those kids sitting there. Allison, my chief of staff, and I said, what can we do? And I want to thank my colleagues for supporting this effort as well. $3 million to me is a drop in a bucket compared to they cannot commit more crimes against the survivors, getting them closure. Thank you all personally. I look forward to getting our perpetrators. And let me be clear that sexual assault is a violent crime, as you said, facilitate additional DA Williams. Getting them off the street so that they cannot commit more crimes against our community. So again, I just want to thank you all personally. I look forward to getting our DNA lab up and running, and we need to circle up on how we can maybe facilitate additional crime lab efforts and testing as we go forward in our efforts. So thank you all for appearing here today. I know you have other things to do, so go do them. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Anita, while we have a quorum, why don't we go ahead to number 2?
Yes, please. To the approval of the minutes for the January 29th and the February 24th meetings.
I'll move.
Second.
Councilmember Green seconds, all in favor?
Jocelyn Pinkerton.
Thank you so much. That passes. And can you read number 4 for us?
Sure. This is the Sexual Assault Awareness Month presentation from Dr. Jordan Pedalino, Sexual Assault Project Specialist, For the New Orleans Health Department, Jocelyn Pinkerton, Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault Program Manager for the Health Department.
Can you just introduce yourselves before we get into the presentation?
Sure. I'm Jocelyn Pinkerton. I'm the Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault Program Manager for the City of New Orleans Health Department.
Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Jordan Pedalino. I am the Sexual Assault Project Specialist, also with the New Orleans Health Department.
Sure. I'm Jocelyn
under
Pinkerton.
Dr.
I'm the
Jennifer
Domestic
Begno.
Violence and Sexual Assault Program Manager for the City of New Orleans Health Department.
Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Jordan Pedalino. I am the Sexual Assault Project Specialist, also with the New Orleans Health Department, under Dr. Jennifer Begno.
I think we're pulling your presentation up.
That's fine. Thank you. Again, good afternoon. I want to thank you all for having us here to acknowledge this issue, to talk about Sexual Assault Awareness Month, and to talk about what the city's currently doing. I do not want to move forward without just extending. Again, good afternoon. I want to thank you all for having us here to acknowledge this issue, to talk about Sexual Assault Awareness Month, and to talk about what the city's currently doing. I will continue to do not want to move forward without just extending my heart for survivors and for Miss Jamie and Miss Catherine, who went before. If you're still in the room or if you watch, I do this work for this reason, and I will continue to work and shout from the rooftops, as many of my colleagues will do the same, for survivors and for the people of our community. So I just want to say, if you're still in the room or if you watch this later, I believe you, I hear you, really think, and we are doing the best that we can to make this city a better place. On the ground and working directly with survivors. With that, I want to just recognize all of my partners behind me. I'll read a list of them in just a bit, but I want to really thank everyone who showed up today and everyone that continues to show up, doing this work on the ground and working directly with survivors and making sure that people's needs are met. This is the city's first ever citywide unified sexual assault committee crew. We've been meeting since around November. We're here for Sexual Assault Awareness Month, and I'm happy and I'm very proud to introduce Crescent City Courage. This is the city's first ever citywide unified sexual assault committee crew. We've been meeting since around November. What we've seen in previous Sexual Assault Awareness Months in April in the city is quite a few different events happening, lots of things happening at the same time, different agencies not collaborating together on these events, and it becomes really confusing for folks in the city to know where, what, who to support, and how to be of service during April. And so this year we decided to come together as a group of agencies and really try to work together to get this collaboration and the cohesion between all of us. And so I do want to read off each of these participating agencies. Other folks have participated in events, but these are in particular the agencies that have really worked with Crescent City Courage. We've been meeting weekly for over 2 months now. And so also if you're behind me and you'd like to just wave to the council or do a little services, I would love that. So we've had VIA-Link, the District Attorney's Office, that is both the Special Victims Unit and the SACI Unit that have been involved, the Children's Advocacy Center, Southeast Louisiana Legal Services, the New Orleans Family Justice Center, the Orleans Women with a Vision, Eden Centers for Hope, Sexual Trauma Awareness and Response, University Medical Center, Covenant House, Beyond Harm, the Promise of Justice Initiative, the New Orleans Police Department, the Orleans Parish Sheriff's Office, Southern University of New Orleans, and as well, we've also had the Office of Criminal Justice Coordination and the Louisiana Foundation Against Sexual Assault. Apologies, those did not make it to the slide. But like many of community
communities across the country, we're experiencing a reduction in available federal grant funding for victim services. These changes are part of a much larger, broad shift in federal funding and their priorities. In February this year, we saw that OVW removed all their grant openings and allocations from their website, with no word thus far on when those will return. We've also seen in the last year over $630 million cut from VOCA funding. And with the RPE, Rape Prevention Education funding, we have seen over $22 million in reduction of that funding. What we're talking about with RPE funding is the funding that can send us into schools, the funding that can help us prevent sexual assault before it occurs. And there is fear of complete elimination of some of this funding. So as a result, some of our local agencies, those behind me and not present today, are facing major resource gaps. There's a fear that capacity will not be able to be met, and that underserved communities in particular will go unseen. We're working to adapt and identify different forms of funding. There are other states, for example, New York, just allocated an executive budget of $20 million to replace some of that federal funding. So there are victim assistance programs out there, and we, along the health department, along with everyone behind me, we are trying to identify some of those other funding sources, because we don't know what's going to happen just yet. Day on the 30th. This is our calendar of events. This is one of the more lighthearted things we're getting to do. We're planning lots of events. We have merchandise. We're doing a Teal Tuesday. We would love if folks would want to participate in that. We also have a Denim Day on the 30th. The Office of Criminal Justice Coordination had a Start by Believing Day last Wednesday here in City Hall on the first floor. That is a place where folks can pledge to be there and to support survivors and believe them. Today we got to be here with you all at City Council. Again, gratitude for that. We do have a Know Your Rights workshop coming up where we're going to have different attorneys as well as Lieutenant Sheila Celios with the Special Victims Division presenting on different survivor rights, as well as a movie screening, a yoga session, and then a fashion show later this April. So we're very, very excited as Crescent City Courage to be able to be here, presenting to you all, participating. We'd love your participation. And the idea of Crescent City Courage is that we will be around much longer than just April. We'd like to stick around and continue to raise awareness throughout the year, not just in April. To be a term to encompass in the following slides, I'm going to say the word sexual violence. This is a much broader term. We are trying to expand our language more so today than ever. We want sexual violence to be a term to encompass sexual assault, but also to encompass the other harmful acts that can occur to survivors. So what we're talking about there is sexual exploitation, harassment in the workplace or outside of the workplace, but also to include the physical, sexual assault, rape, molestation. And this is a very big issue. We've heard prior to us coming up here that everyone is affected. No one is immune from being affected by sexual violence. And we'd like to come up with ways to prevent sexual assault and to make the city a healthier, safer place. Because what we do know is that sexual violence is a public health issue. So we are housed under the New Orleans Health Department, and we have an Office of Violence Prevention that we fall under. We have the Sexual Assault and Domestic Violence Program, and then the Sexual Violence Program or Sexual Assault Program falls under that. And what we know, these are just our general United States stats. As you can see, there is no one exempt from these, and this is without going deeper into our transient and underserved populations. We're looking at more than 1 in 3 women and nearly 1 in 4 men who have experienced sexual violence that is involving physical contact. So that is not including sexual harassment or other harmful acts that may not include physical contact. Our children are being affected. We just heard from someone, 1 in 9 girls and 1 in 20 boys under the age of 18 are experiencing sexual abuse or assault. That is a really high number, and we know that children in New Orleans are experiencing violence at a high rate. The majority of just shows that. Out of 10 rapes, in their home, their perpetrator is 8 of 10 are committed by someone the victim knows. So while New Orleans does see stranger assaults due to the tourist population, we also see the majority of folks know their perpetrator. Their perpetrator is the person in their home. Their perpetrator is a family member. Their perpetrator is a family friend, or a classmate or a dating partner. 93% of juvenile victims also knew their perpetrator. Sexual violence, as we know, can have psychological, emotional, physical effects, and many others on survivors, which is why at the health department we take it very seriously as a public health issue. That way it doesn't jump around as much. More of a local way of looking at things. So this line shows a rolling average of sexual assault reports in New Orleans. We show this rather than just raw month-to-month numbers. That way it doesn't jump around as much. And we can see if we're consistently rising or falling or staying level over time, it does give us a more clear view of overall trends. What I want to say about this is that we know, and it was mentioned before, that anywhere from 20 to 30% of sexual assaults are reported to law enforcement, and that's it. So we want to see this number grow. Contradictory to belief or fears of watching this number grow, we want to see it grow. It needs to grow. We need to know that more people are reaching out to law enforcement, that more people are feeling like they will be heard and listened to. We have consistently maintained higher than that. There's a few dips and jumps here within this. What we know is that not once in a very long time have we seen under one case reported per day on average. We have consistently maintained higher than that, and I have a few numbers here for you. While these numbers reflect a high community need, we know that these numbers could be much larger. And these are not all the agencies that we work directly with, but these are some of the ones that we wanted to mention. University Medical Center consulted on 419 cases in the year of 2024. The Family Justice Center served 255 clients. This is sexual assault. The New Orleans Sexual Trauma Awareness and Response Office, the one here in New Orleans, served 337 clients, and the New Orleans Police Department saw 681 reports to sex crime special victims division. So we know that support is necessary to maintain this capacity. Also, if we see these numbers grow, we don't want to have to turn people away. We don't want the underserved populations to not be served. Momentum. And so at the health department, we have created, or it was created, my position around a little over 2 years ago. And since then, we have been building coordination, awareness, capacity, momentum, and we're not just building systems, rather we're making them more accessible for folks there. So we're using the resources that are there and attempting to build those to a greater level. University Medical Center, the health department, we coordinate the sexual assault response team case review. There I do want to shout out our partners at NOPD, Lieutenant Celios and her crew in the sex crimes division, special victims unit, Zaki, University Medical Center. We all get together once a month for 2 hours and go over different sexual assault cases to try to increase just collaboration and making sure that survivors' needs are met. We also coordinate the Sexual Violence Advisory Response Committee that was started right after the consent decree was put into place. And on somewhat of a larger scale, we look at what's going on in the city of New Orleans and what are the things that we can propose as change or as needs on a larger scale. probably our biggest. We also coordinate the Greater New Orleans Sexual Assault Domestic Violence Campus Meeting. We meet every other month, and that is with the Title IX coordinators and other folks that are officials within universities and campuses around New Orleans. We have a small training. And then probably our biggest meeting is the Sexual Assault and Domestic Violence Action Coalition. We meet on the third Friday of every month, and that is an open community meeting, mostly for folks that are working with survivors in any capacity. We usually have a small training in the beginning, and then it is about the best place to do networking in the city for sexual assault and domestic violence work. In 2025, this year, we were able, in the last year, 2024, we were able to successfully get into educating and training with the New Orleans Police Department. We are attending every in-service training in 2025 and we have just recently gone officers and supervisors to talk about sexual violence and the way that they can respond. We've also trained 911 dispatch and are continuing to do that on a regular basis, as well as EMS. And we have just recently gone into the criminal court system and have been training judges and staff and plan to do that on a continuous basis as well. We've also done legislative work and prioritized underserved populations. As far as funding, these are just some of those accomplishments that we've had last year in particular. We were able to revise an MOU for medical advocacy with community-based partners and University Medical Center. I want to mention, as far as funding, the medical advocacy program is looking at a serious fear that this funding may get fear of being cut. In this MOU, we did have to write wording in it that this medical advocacy support from service agencies was dependent on funding. So it's a pretty big fear that this funding may get cut, and there will be no way to have medical advocates at the hospital with survivors while they get these forensic exams. We have had really great response. We've also presented to the sexual assault, we've presented to the city council and other stakeholders the sexual violence advisory response report. We have had really great response from NOPD. I'd like to recognize Chief Nick Gernon over there, and we were able to get additional funding from NOPD. They just recently were able to get 8 new detectives in the Special Victims Division, so we're hoping that will really help with capacity. They've also been able to hire over 8 new civilian investigators, and they have been able to participate more in community meetings. As well as doing some training. As far as education, we are also working with the Orleans Parish Sheriff's Office and the Orleans Justice Center with PREA implementation. We're looking at getting a few different programs started over at OJC, as well as doing some training with their staff and potentially a peer training with folks who are incarcerated. We've been working with service providers who work with folks experiencing homelessness. We've done multiple trainings with them in both sexual assault and domestic violence. And we are working with different LGBTQIA plus organizations, making sure that folks in that community also feel comfortable coming forward. As far as advocacy goes, we did work with 2 House bills last year. We worked with House Bill 779, which was successfully passed at the end of session. That standardized language regarding crimes against children, particularly around human trafficking. We also coordinated and testified on House Bill 189, which successfully passed as well, and it allows civilian investigators to attend, be present, and conduct forensic interviews. It has the partnership and it has an ability for NOPD detectives to be able to work on other things while those interviews are taking place. So we know that the work is far from over, but New Orleans does have the structure, I believe. It has the partnerships, and it has the momentum to lead. I'm not sure that those things are at full capacity just yet, but I do think that we have the ability to get there with the proper support. With that support, we can deepen our impact, and we can make sure that no survivor falls through the cracks. So some of our future priorities, domestic violence, you may be aware, has the Advocacy Initiated Response Program. We'd like to have a model similar to that in the future for medical advocacy and for sexual assault reporting. We're not sure what that looks like yet, but we're hoping to have something similar in the future. We're also partnering with NOPD to review and process data. That's been in the works for quite some time now, and we're hoping that we'll be able to really look at data and be able to have a better idea of those gaps that we're missing. We'd also like to work on more flexible survivor funding. We know that we're seeing survivors late at night at the hospital who may not be able to immediately access a service agency, and we'd like for them to be able to have access to flexible funding. Again, we also want to continue the momentum of Crescent City Courage, as I mentioned, throughout the year, having multiple events, doing more advocacy together as a city and not everyone doing everything solo. For survivors. So some of the things again, we're forever grateful for City Council's past and present support. We need the support for these programs to flourish as they are essential for survivors. So some of the things that we are looking for in particular is a continued investment. It helps us maintain trauma-informed care. It reduces things like long wait times or being able to offer survivors some sense of stability when they present at one of these agencies. At a time right now with federal funding being so uncertain, we really just need to know that there is support out there in case some of these services begin to fall apart. At a time when sources like VOCA and OVW are uncertain, local support is more important than ever. Our ability to serve improves dramatically when we have access to timely and accurate, coordinated data. While we are already working with NOPD with the data, we are asking for support in building that infrastructure, supporting staffing, and building the capacity for the need to look at this data and figure out what our gaps are. This can help us evaluate outcomes and guide the data-informed policy and funding decisions that we need to make in the future. We need that flexible funding, which allows us not all survivors are equally able to access services, unfortunately, especially those in the BIPOC, LGBT, QIA+, immigrants, disabled, and low-income communities. We need that flexible funding, which allows us to meet survivors where they're at. We need to be able to adapt our approaches, whether that be offering services in different languages, offering transportation to these different service agencies, funding childcare, funding education. That way that we have equity in these services, giving everyone a fair chance to heal, because we're not seeing that just yet when you're shaping policies. And we know that survivors are facing barriers in the criminal justice system, as you just heard and as we know, as well as in housing and employment and in healthcare. And we're asking the council to consider survivor voices when you're shaping policies, when you're having meetings, when you're talking about things even as simple as zoning, not simple, but as zoning, or as different safety measures. Consider survivors when you're making those policies. And our office, myself included, are always happy to consult during those decisions. Want to be making sure that survivors are continuous thought with the council and with the city. From an early we have had difficulty getting access to New Orleans schools. We, as well as many of our partner agencies, want to be in New Orleans schools. We know that if we can get in from an early start, prevention education has a huge impact on our city. By supporting age-appropriate education and prevention, like consent, boundaries, we can prevent sexual violence before it even begins. So we are ready to partner with schools. We're ready to go to youth serving organizations and bring evidence-based curriculum and training to your neighborhood organizations. Many people still don't know what to say when someone is sexually assaulted. It is still a fear for folks to figure out how to be able to talk about that. We offer free community training, whether for your staff, your neighborhood organizations, public support from elected officials, programs, and leaders in the community. An invitation from you goes a long way. It says a lot, and it says that there is support and participation amongst those in our city. And finally, public support from elected officials and leaders of the community. It can reduce stigma, it can increase reporting, and it sends a powerful message that survivors are not alone. When people know that people are listening, so we ask that you stand with us, not just in simple acts such as issuing a SAM proclamation, showing up at events, wearing teal on Teal Tuesdays, or sharing posts that we make. It makes a big impact. So we ask that you stand with us, not just in April for Sexual Assault Awareness Month, but for all year round. I do want to put this up for a moment. This is Resources for Survivors. We have a website link in the New Orleans Health Department website that has a direct link for resources for survivors of both domestic violence and sexual assault. Anyone can visit that just by going to the Health Department's website, hitting the Office of Violence Prevention link, and that will be within there. And at this time, I just want to, again, extend my gratitude for allowing us to be here and talk about this. And at any point, we're happy to take any questions or consult at any time.
Thank you, Dr. Catalino. Councilmember Thomas.
First of all, thank you. You mentioned the schools and Poconomia, and I volunteer a lot in the schools, not in high school, elementary programs, especially where we focus on kids also sponsoring after-school programs. To each other. But several years ago, the conversation around relationships amongst kids and the volatility. We still not in high school or college, but in middle school, especially in society how kids were being very aggressive, younger children, and physical to each other if there were disagreements, these images, and if there were disputes, hypersexual. But we still, that was several years ago. In many cases, we still don't seem to have anything that's coordinated, especially in society today. I was brought up where younger and younger children are looking at that's a good thing, but these images, what it is, hypersexual. But we're not doing anything constructive in many cases. When you talk about how do we mitigate the good old mom and pop value on television that I was brought up under that we used to have. I don't know how that's a good thing, but it is what it is, and it's where we are. In terms of how do we stop some of the violence that's happening. We're not doing anything constructive when you talk about how do we mitigate what they're seeing on television, what they're seeing on their phone, what they're seeing on social media, and how they're being marketed to. In terms of how do we stop some of the violence that's happening, doing something more constructive with the schools. Very young teens, because in adolescence, sexually and emotionally, schools where what has been kids are being approached about, how would I say, the roadblock in terms of getting something, doing something more constructive with the schools. Being bullied because about it, but they're experiencing it. The schools don't go public with it because I can tell you some schools where kids are being approached. We don't have any program about to actually deal with it. So how do we fix kind of sexual person they ought to be, why they ought to be, and being bullied about it. But the schools don't go public with it because if I'm definitely it's a stereotype on them. Why are we? And then we don't have any programming to actually deal with it. In many cases, so how do we covering it up because it's common knowledge.
Yeah, so
I know prominent schools
definitely right, Councilmember Thomas. I think,
but if I'm definitely right, and told why are we allowing it to happen, and why are the schools, in many cases, covering it up because it's common knowledge.
So I think two things here. First thing is that, having,
as young men and women being
having conversations about
in the restroom
sexual
and told
violence,
what they ought to be and how they ought to be.
Respond to survivors, how to intervene. In a situation like that is
so
something
I
that
think
I think
two things
we
here.
need to normalize.
First thing is that having
and so that's part of the reason why
Jordan mentioned having conversations about
when it comes to
sexual violence,
schools,
how to respond to survivors.
survivors how to intervene in a situation like that is something that I think we need to normalize a lot more. And so that's part of the reason why we're happy to be talking today. When it comes to prevention work in schools, that's absolutely something that we would love to do more of. A lot of the funds that fund those programs, like the CDC funds for rape prevention education, those were cut at the beginning of the year. Our Office of Violence Against Women Fund provides funding for our prevention program, but like we mentioned, those grant opportunities are not published right now. So there's very minimal funding for prevention programming, and the funding that we do have is really, we're worried that it's on the chopping block. So the other thing is that, the decentralized nature of our schools means that we have to go to each individual school and try to engage with each individual school around this. And I think that a lot of times schools may be reticent because of resources or time or reluctance to acknowledge that this might be an issue that they're facing in their program. So having, we have some mandates around requirements for particular dating violence education in schools, but it's very difficult to track that or enforce it, and then on top of that, trying to engage schools in providing something that they might be reluctant to do based on time or capacity. So I think one thing, like I said, education programs for kids, getting familiar with talking about this issue, based on whether the schools will let us coordinated funds for funding prevention in schools is a real gap for us. And then also really engaging with our partners. We have some of our partners do go into schools and do education programs for kids, but it's really piecemeal, and it's really based on whether the schools will let us in or not. So having a more sort of unified effort, I think, is also something that we are working towards, but we need.
I think Jocelyn touched on it, and you said what I just want to add is, unfortunately, if you're in schools, let them know, talk to them, ask them to reach out to us, tell me to reach out to them. The more we normalize it, the more we talk about it, through that with folks. Again, I do want to say, too, I think Jocelyn touched on it, and you said it, there is a stereotype, unfortunately. There is this fear to say these things are happening in our school. And so the more we normalize it, the more we talk about it, the more we say, hey, we know this is happening in your school because it's happening in all schools, we may be able to get a better reception from folks.
I saw on your slide the reported cases in 2024, which are over one a day.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Do we know what, Councilmember Green, do we know what the percentage of underreporting is? Well, I just have a couple questions. I saw on your slide the reported cases in 2024, which are over one a day, right?
With the DA's office,
do we know what the percentage of underreporting is based on the reported cases?
So we don't have numbers in particular to New Orleans. That's one of the things that we're trying to figure out with data, with NOPD, with the DA's office. These conversations are happening. We know that nationwide, anywhere from 20 to 30% of cases are being reported.
A very high number here of underreporting.
I would imagine it's somewhere around the same in New Orleans, potentially a little higher, just because we do know we have some numbers that are a little bit higher, but
sexual violence.
I couldn't say with certainty.
Right, so if you extrapolate that, then we're at a very high number here of underreporting. And I thank you for what can we do to, and I would love to sit with you to talk about those, to stop that, to make sure that people are comfortable reporting sexual violence, and thank you for correcting my vocabulary. What steps can we take? And I thank you for coming with specific asks, and I would love to sit with you to talk about those, especially as we know that funding is going to dry up for victim support services. And I assume if that victim support services dries up funding, then that means that we will go to an even higher percentage of underreporting cases. So what can we do to try to break that cycle of underreporting to get people comfortable to step forward?
For sure. Maybe don't feel that justice is conserved. It would be to work on the services that we already have. It is to improve those systems responses. As you saw, we had 2 survivors, and that's 2 of who knows how many who maybe don't feel that justice has been served. It is a common thing that we see. And it is part of my job. I think we just to coordinate the response of sexual assault response in the city. And so I do believe in being in direct service prior to this. detective being in the work for 10 years in New Orleans, I have seen change. I've seen progress, and I think we just have to continue on that route. But we can't do that without certain things being met. For instance, our detectives are overworked. The consent decree came out at some point and said 26 cases per year per detective. Last year, they were all looking at over 90 per detective. So without being able to staff, without being able to have that dedicated time to survivors, we may not see that for a while until things start to change.
And how much you might need. You talk specifically about medical advocacy programming, looking at cuts, and I think that's so very important that you have a medical advocate there when you're reporting a sexual assault. Do you know how much cuts we can anticipate and how much you might need for just the medical advocacy part of the
will not have
programming?
funding past October 1st of this year to support medical. I don't know that there is a direct number that we know just yet. They are, I do know, line of medical sexual trauma awareness and response. New Orleans office will not have funding past October 1st of this year to support medical advocacy in Orleans Parish. They are our second line of medical advocacy to the New Orleans Family Justice Center. And the New Orleans Family Justice Center, again, within that MOU, had to write a specific sentence stating that their ability to provide medical advocacy was based upon funding, but because it's so uncertain right now, I don't know that I have a specific answer.
Yeah, I think, and we could definitely get that number too. I think, like Jordan mentioned, I think it's pretty minimal though. It doesn't take a whole lot to, I mean, it's a big lift to staff these programs, but it's a pretty minimal investment. And that just goes to show like what small amounts of funding we're working with that we're already fearful of getting cut. I think, like Jordan mentioned, one thing that we would love to do is to be able to really expand that service and make sure that we are holistically serving survivors that do come forward, because like Jordan said, I think that's a really significant way to then get more people to report, is if you have, if people report and they have a good experience, or they have a positive experience in the reception that they get from the people they report to, that's something that we are really concerned about. And so, we can definitely, provide numbers and what that would look like to maintain that program, but also thinking about how to expand. We're talking about sort of a couple of staff members at our agencies at a minimum, but we'd love to sort of go further than that.
Okay, yeah, let's definitely talk offline about that. Just a couple more questions, and then Councilmember Green. You talked about being able to have programming within our schools, and we have a new school superintendent, which is great, and hopefully you will approach her and she will be receptive to this conversation. But we also have NORD, and we have children who come through the NORD system. Are you providing any programming in connection with any NORD programming? Yeah, you have sort of, or has that been a conversation audience there?
It's not something that we're doing currently, but again, given a little bit more resources, we would love to be able to engage more with other programs that touch kids as well.
Yeah, you have sort of a built-in audience there, and Councilmember Moreno and I also bring some programming to NORD programming that might be beneficial. I certainly welcome you to anything that we have going on. We have a Young Women's Leadership Academy in connection with Loyola that I'll invite you to speak. So we need to make sure that Councilmember Moreno and I also have Level Up for Girls Leadership Academy as well. But this doesn't just touch girls. We need to normalize that many of our boys have been victimized, and so we need to make sure that we're reaching them as well. Councilmember Green.
This week is, I was going to wait until after the comments, but the public comments, and I certainly welcome those, but something you said just I just want to remind everyone that this is Sexual Assault Awareness Month. This week is that you do National Crime Victims' Rights Week. And I want to thank organizations that they're not alone, family justice, that there are people who will work with them, and also organizations that you mentioned, NOPD, issue of the health department, not feeling comfortable, calling in. I just want to work that you do to let victims of crimes and survivors know that they're not alone, that there are people who will work with them. And whereas I can't solve the issue of people not feeling comfortable calling in, I just want to let them know that this Thursday hearing today, today's rally that's taking place starting in Armstrong Park, if anybody wishes to come, you're welcome. It's at 6 o'clock. Traumatic as a walk through the French Quarter. Organizations and people who want to help. Victims and survivors support organizations are going to be here at the council on Thursday. But I just want to emphasize to anybody who's watching that is tragic as it seems and as traumatic as it can be, there are organizations and people who want to help. Justice. I just want to encourage them to recognize that they might find a friendly, they will find a friendly voice, and they call the help those organizations have. Or if they call the New Orleans Police Department, a social worker, for example, in every district, or if they call the Family Justice to make sure that they find, they call organizations such as the Sheriff's watching and those who pay attention and recognize those organizations have, each of them have somebody who is very sympathetic, if you will, but also very motivated to make sure that justice is delivered. So I just encourage those who are watching and those who are hesitant to take that step, recognizing that there's a lot of support, and I appreciate the support that you and STAR.
Hi, my name is Jasmine Adams. I serve as the campus sexual assault project coordinator for the Louisiana Foundation Against Sexual Assault. First, I want to thank Jordan and the New Orleans Health Department for their initiatives surrounding sexual assault in the city. But as the sexual assault project my name is Jasmine Adams. I serve as the campus sexual assault project coordinator for the Louisiana Foundation Against Sexual Assault. First, I want to thank Jordan and the New Orleans Health Department for their initiatives surrounding sexual assault in the city. But as the sexual assault project coordinator for La FASA, I serve every campus and college and technical college throughout the state, right? I wanted to kind of address the question Councilman O.T. had about getting into the schools. First of all, we have a hard time saying sex. We have a hard time saying rape, right? And so in order to change that, we first need to start with some sex positivity. It's going to be hard for our children to come forward and tell us about bad things that are happening with sex when we demonize it so much, right? And we have to change the language around it. They're not even using the correct verbiage because sex education is no longer in the schools. So that's where we should start. Let's start adding sexual health education back, and then we can work in consent. We can talk about boundaries, and then it will kind of so stifled to talk about the things that are happening wrong, right? Because we already have demonized sex, right? So to start there. Secondly, thank you, Jordan, for bringing up the funding, right? There's a lot of executive orders that are coming through, and it is stifling and kind of suffocating all of our programs. Some of the things that La FASA does is fund and accredit the sexual assault crisis centers throughout the state, including the New Orleans Family Justice Center, right? And so after all of these orders are trickling down, it is going to be very important for our city to come through and figure out where we can find those resources if we want to be continuous in our survivor support services. So thank you for that. Just wanted to say thank you to Jordan and all the work that you've done, bringing all of the partners together, and we hope that there's a brighter future when it comes to sexual violence within our city.
I am with STAR, Sexual Trauma Awareness and Response, and I wanted to briefly touch on what was mentioned during this presentation. For Voca Orleans this year, STAR
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alex Tarnowski. I am with STAR, Sexual Trauma Awareness and Response.
To what we were awarded.
And
I
wanted to briefly touch on
counselor and was mentioned during this presentation. For Voca Orleans this year, STAR saw a 47% cut in what we requested to what we were awarded. Ways that the city
right, and so we had requested funding for a full-time counselor
like the Family Justice
and
Center, right?
50% of a full-time advocate.
General operating
the
dollars,
funding is going to cover 75% of a counselor, so we have to find additional funding. And there are ways that the city can support organizations like STAR, like the Family Justice Center, right? Not just through general operating dollars, because federal funds have a lot of restrictions and we're limited on what we can use it for. And
is safe.
It's hard when you live in New Orleans and there's a heat wave and your electric bill
it's the only
for
time
the
that they do
office is $400.
It could also
right?
look
So
like
general operating dollars
space
allows us to move
at a
the money
discounted rate,
to
right?
ensure
Rent
that our
is so high
office space
for
is safe
individuals
and
and for
comfortable for the
businesses,
survivors who
especially
come
for
to us.
nonprofits, and trying to
And
make
for many
sure
of them,
that
it's the
we
only
have
time that they do feel
location that is easily
It could
accessible
also look like
by streetcar
providing
or by
space
bus at a discounted rate, and ensuring that we're able so high to be where survivors need us to be, and for businesses, especially for nonprofits, and trying to make sure that we have a location that is easily accessible by streetcar or by bus low is important. Recognizing and ensuring that we're able to be where survivors need us, and the impact it has on the people doing this work does require. I will say, while medical advocacy, the cost for it, so ensuring that survivors have relatively low.
Thank you, Alex.
Recognizing that the
thank you for the comment.
vicarious trauma that comes along with that and the impact it has on the people doing this work does require more money and support, and so ensuring that survivors have someone with them. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Councilmember Thomas.
No, thank you for the comment. We've been challenged here about what to do with excess services per capita property of facilities management. And maybe, Councilmember, especially we should take a look at the nonprofits who in many cases too much of their money is going into renting or leasing buildings and not enough going into the services per capita to people. How can we partner with nonprofit organizations? Be willing to make sure that they're providing especially excess properties and they have that on the city's roads that are being vacant because we're consolidating potential cuts for a lot of our services. I would hope that I think the next effort would be from this committee, how can we partner with the nonprofit organizations to make sure that they're providing needed services and they have affordable rent, especially given the light that we may be looking at a lot of potential cuts for a lot of vital services. So I think, and I think from this committee, I'd definitely be willing to partner with you to kind of broker or mediate that.
Absolutely, Councilmember Thomas, I appreciate that, and I know that the school board is also looking at redeveloping some schools that have not been having school children because our population is shrinking. I don't want to belabor this point, but I know that we had some issues with the reporting of data which caused a decline in our VOCA funding. Here, I do want to talk about VOCA money for a second because VOCA is tied to data
I honestly
reporting.
just came here today to listen and to learn.
And I don't want to belabor this point, but I know that we had some issues with the reporting of data which caused a decline in our VOCA funding. Do you have any words about that or any thoughts? All right.
I honestly just came here today to listen and to learn.
Just in closing, I want to say thank you again. We really appreciate the opportunity.
And I don't have anything to add other than what's already been reported on it.
And also for anyone listening
All right, thank you. I like to just call people out at these meetings. All right. Any final words?
I think just in closing, I want to say thank you again. We really appreciate the opportunity to be here today. And also for anyone listening tonight, the Superdome, the Crescent City Connection Bridge, and University Medical Center and the State Capitol in Baton Rouge will all be lit up teal for survivors.
And with that, I'll move to adjourn. Thank you so much, Jordan. Thank you so much, Jocelyn. Thank you to all of our groups here who do yeoman's work and work boots on the ground on this every single day. And with that, I'll move to adjourn.
Second.
Seconded by Councilmember Green. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you all.